wide panoply of gaits that horses use today, which are mainly
it's
used
hot.
for our own enjoyment.
It's disgustingly hot today.
So emphasizing pacing,
Sorry.
dressage type, fancy
Sorry, but
gaits.
I don't like the heat.
Tolting gait, which is kind of a running walk that Icelandic ponies use. These are much more modern phenomena that use the plasticity of horses in many ways to our own advantage for aesthetic purposes largely.
Do we know? Yes. I think what's interesting there is that although the running walk gait seems to be a modern invention in horses of single gene, we have evidence that some of the Cerrito horses, the Hipparians, also used a running walk gait from track race in Africa in the Antilles, with the same track race in Tanzania that produced those footprints of Australopithecus about 4 million years old. We have a Cerrito horse there doing a running walk gait.
So you're saying until about a couple of hundred years ago, horses had not changed much, and then they changed an awful lot in the last 200 years.
I would say the major changes are non-locomotor, so other changes that humans were harnessing in terms of the genetic plasticity of horses, equids, the whole group, including Astons, zebras, and so forth. Horses are tremendously plastic in terms of how many chromosomes they can have. They can go from 16 to 33 sets of chromosomes in zebras to wild horses, for example. And then there's plasticity in their muscle, how much myostatin, a certain protein they have that relates to endurance or sprinting ability. So that could have been harnessed. Stamina could have been harnessed, and cold or hot adaptiveness. So horses have certain genes related to like water conservation that have been shown to have a lot of selection on them that humans probably harnessed especially once they brought horses around the world.
Oh!
It's quite correct that many of the modern things are actually very recent. So if you think about
I'm okay, hello!
major developments by
No, it's not finished.
100 years ago about, we know that they are
Almost finished, but not quite finished.
warfare. So the first culture we know that's doing that is also in that same area of the northern steppe in Russia and northern Kazakhstan called the Sintashta culture about 4,100 years ago. You get burials with chariots and warriors, so they're definitely doing things very early on. And actually that culture is the very first time that you see the modern clade of domestic horses come in. Because we actually find that those early Batai horses are not the ones that led to the modern domesticates, but those Sintashta ones do lead to the modern domesticates.
What have you done?
They must be changing how people travel, how people ride.
Oh, I'm listening to a radio program about the evolution of horses,
Because one thing
which I've listened to before, but I like,
massively changed travel.
I enjoy listening to it. I enjoy the
Get to grips with that. So if you could give me a hand, that would be much appreciated.
the program.
That very first interaction, I think, was more about food and using them
It's
as a
I'm actually the
But by the time you're getting to the middle Bronze Age period,
It's in our time on
years ago, it's quite clear they're being used in
Radio
the
4.
That's when the modern type of horse appears. And around that time, you do see huge amounts of migration going on. So there's a culture called the Yamnaya culture.
Excuse me, the right orientation.
But certainly by this
Yeah.
time,
This one's dark.
you're getting a major introduction of horses. They're beginning to be used as a high status animal. They're appearing in graves with ritual
Not so dark.
warriors and so on and so forth. So they are having a major effect on our ability to move, trade, conduct different types of warfare.
John Hutchinson, can we talk about the Kozlowski horse? How does that fit into what's going on?
Sure, yeah. So that's a wild horse that has some differences from the domestic horse, as Alan was saying. The Kozlowski's horse seems to date back earlier. Is a proper wild horse with some interesting characteristics. If we looked at it, we would say, oh, that's a different kind of horse. It's got some stripy legs. It's got a kind of a big robust muzzle that's adapted to its harsh climate is
Found. Is that found back in the
back in the steppes. Yeah. So it's back in the Eurasian environment that modern equids evolved from, but it's not exactly that stock.
So there's a difficult finding we've had over the years. It's always been regarded
So
that the Jurassic horse is the true wild horse.
Still there now.
And it's still there now. It was reintroduced.
Sorry, what do you...
New York Zoo and was reintroduced into Mongolia.
Oh, I've listened to that a few times, but I prefer...
The earliest we think
I find it a bit dumbed down.
appear to have the direct ancestors of these Shavatsky's.
I find it a bit dumbed down.
I'll only say raises the question because we need to do a lot more work as to whether that population is still a true wild one or actually a long-time feral one that went back into the wild. I don't know the answer absolutely. I mean,
To make my my special recipe of black.
How do feral
Well, it's not my recipe. It's
differ from domesticated horses?
yeah, I find it a bit. I find your debt to me a bit dumbed down. I mean,
To being a rather similar kind of horse. Think of the Mustang in America, the Brumby in Australia, even the native ponies. They're all the size of a stocky large pony. That seems to be a basic sort of horse morph that they revert back to. So you don't see things like thoroughbreds or sire horses being feral horses. Anything that like the horses that came in North America that came from the conquistadors, they're all sort of stocky large pony kind of horses. That seems to be the optimum kind of
I can see your.
I might be restricting myself on this by talking about the horse. There are various different sorts of horses moving along different tracks. Is that right? Big horses, small horses,
I don't like this. I can't.
speed horses, war horses.
Let me have a look if I can.
Feral horses, the horses go back to the wild today. They tend to converse on a certain kind of body form.
As long as I don't
When
get
did the
too
idea of
close.
intensive breeding of horses set in? It's now a part of the world economy. But when did it set in?
well, you mentioned war horses earlier, and actually I think some of it is to do with war horses. I think the earliest evidence we have of intensive breeding programs, there certainly were selecting horses earlier on, but really intensive breeding might come in the medieval period. The first hints of it in the genetics are in the early centuries. And some of that seems to within Europe in general, but it seems to relate partly to the Islamic conquest of Spain and actually later, a little bit later, our crusades and contact with Arabian stock.
So I was wondering about where the Arabian horses fitted in. They come in here, but
Yes, so in this medieval period, you begin to see the proportion of Arabian stock rise, and that seems to be quite deliberate. And also,
what's so good about Arabian stock?
well, possibly some traits to do with speed, possibly related to that. We see some of those coming up in the genetics too at this time, beginning to increase in frequency to do with speed. So that was the period, and at the same time we know that people were setting up proper studs. That's when the first studs were happening, and largely to do with things like war horses. So royal studs were being set up in deer parks in England to provide high quality horses for warfare. And we've got a new project actually at the moment looking at medieval war
It's very blue.
documentary information, all the art, measuring it all, trying to work out what these horses looked like and how this breeding worked, and tying that into the genetics to understand how this is going on. And that intensified into the later medieval period, and into the last few hundred years, as John said earlier, when you really see the modern breeds come out. But I think the start of that intensive breeding is the medieval period.
So can I come back to you, John? This breeding, has it introduced weaknesses for the strengths?
Certainly, the breeding combined with the bottlenecks or genetic drift that horses have experienced throughout their history,
Bottlenecks of genetic.
reduction of genetic variability overall, genetic diversity, that has caused problems for horses. Inbreeding is often a problem, especially the male lineage of horses. The Y chromosome has very, very low genetic diversity today, suggesting that domestic horses descend from a pretty restricted number of stallions used to breed with, whereas the female stock-seeds, but then larger, from what I understand. But also there are advantages there that humans have used in terms of the genetic flexibility of horses that I mentioned before, in terms of chromosome counts of different horse species or breeds, that humans have used those chromosome counts to breed hybrids that are sterile, like horse-donkey hybrids, mules, using the advantages of both species in order to produce a breed that has compliance and endurance and other characteristics that we desire. So that's an advantage through that plasticity provided by the genetics and chromosome count.
There's an enormous number of science, biology, money, and hope going into trying to improve the breed of horses. Is there a sense in which racing horses are reaching a peak of perfection, or near perfection, and that they'll blow up like in Coke's Law they're supposed to?
I suppose it depends what you take as a peak of perfection. Maybe perfection in terms of the way they perform for how they're being bred, but of course they do carry quite a high deleterious load in genetics, this sort of caused by inbreeding and not having the natural selection to take out various genes that are not healthy. So on the one hand they're very good at performing, but they're not necessarily healthy. And if you look at genetics over time, the deleterious load has gone up. Up until that medieval period where people started breeding intensively, the deleterious load was very low, so domestication had existed for thousands of years without really doing that. And then all of a sudden the deleterious load goes up.
The weaknesses, yeah.
Yeah, all the weaknesses, genetic weaknesses. And until now, all domestic horses have a much higher deleterious load than the ones we look at in the pre-medieval period. And actually even the poor Przewalskis have a high deleterious load because they were bottlenecked in New York Zoo, and so there's not actually a horse that we haven't messed up genetically at this point.
Can you tell us about looking at horses now and take a few steps back and their ancestors? Can you tell the listeners what are the chief differences?
Well, we do have horses that are around today that have a single toe, as do zebras and donkeys, and I think what's really going on with that, compared to their three-toed cousins, who were around until a couple of million years ago, it's not just having a single toe, they're also more stiff-backed, and they also have a less flexible knee, and they seem to be more endurance animals in general. So I think what's going on with the single toe is they are getting a sort of a beefed-up pogo stick kind of foot, more elastic energy storage, better endurance locomotion than their three-tailed cousins. But that comes at an expense. The expense is that they're less agile. And if you think about a modern horse or a horse compared to their three-tailed cousins, it would be a bit like comparing a cow to a deer. They're not as agile. They wouldn't have been as agile. They wouldn't have been as flexible. But they would have had an advantage in the very cold, arid world of the past couple of million years, when they had to traverse long distances per day to get food. So that may have been why they survived.
John, I believe it was you who said in your notes that horse is one of the greatest technologies that humans have harnessed. Would you like to develop that?
I find it fascinating that humans are both the cause of horses' demise to a certain degree, that we had a big impact on horse extinctions early on, but also we're the salvation of horses, that we're the reason why horses to a large degree are still around and are so, in a way, diverse, although they're also inbred, so they're not diverse. That's a contradiction of sorts, but they have helped us tremendously, culturally, technologically, through means that we've discussed: transportation, agriculture, warfare, etc., enjoyment, leisure. And we have helped them by preserving them, and hopefully they're enjoying some of that as well.
Depends if you're bragging. Still, why do you think the horse is now? Do you think it's towards the end of a magnificent flourish of life, or do you think there's more development to come?
I think most mammals are towards the end of a magnificent flourishing of life. I think we've got a lot of things going extinct right now. It's very, very worrying.
Do you think the horse is only kept alive because of the human attention that's paid to it?
Equids in general, probably not, but horses, they are not a species that are wild anymore, really, particularly now we've found out that the Savasky's horse is probably a feral horse. So no, that species wouldn't be here at all, except for humans, I don't think.
John was absolutely right when he said that we caused potentially both the demise, because we could have easily hunted horses out completely, but actually we saved them through domestication. But just imagine a world where we weren't able to travel faster than our own walking pace. And horses gave us the fastest form of land transport for thousands of years until you got the steam train, but then that wasn't available to everybody until the motor car became common. Think about the change in the way that people would have fought each other, how migrations would have happened, how trade would have happened. The whole world would have looked completely different if you hadn't have had that ability to move at high speed over all those thousands of years.
I mean, dogs, of course, they're a major success story, and similar parallels with genetic plasticity and how we've used that to produce all sorts of dog breeds, but dogs weren't really on their way out. Dogs were probably doing okay, canid species in general, compared to equids. Horses are big, yummy animals that are great for Paleolithic hunters to make extinct, to hunt down. They're easier prey. Bigger animals are easier to take out, and with climate change, bigger animals are more susceptible to extinction. They evolve more slowly, broadly speaking. So horses are fascinating. The fact that they're still around, that they've survived despite all the odds. Think about all the big mammals that went extinct in the Ice Ages. Horses just sneaked by.
And we're all rather pleased about that, I hope. Yes. Christine, thank you very much. Christine Janis, Alan Outram and John Hutchinson. Next week it's Paul Dirac, Nobel Prize winner from Bristol, one of the greatest theoretical physicists. Thank you for listening.
And the In Our Time podcast gets some extra time now with a few minutes of bonus material from Melvin and his guests.
I think, well, you mentioned Cope's Law, and horses are such a pivotal discussion point on that topic that I think that one would be fun to cover. So Edward Drinker Cope was a paleontologist in America back in the 1800s, a very, very influential paleontologist and with quite a personality. Had a big fight with a guy named Marsh over various fossil dig sites and kind of an arms race digging up fossils. But anyway, he's credited for coming up with an idea called Cope's Rule or Cope's Law, depending on who you ask, because sometimes it's given other names. He didn't really call it anything like that. He used one thing called the Law of the Unspecialized. But anyway, the point was that as animals evolve, they tend to get more specialized or get bigger or both. And horses, if you look at their fossil record, they start small, and then today we have big horses. So if you connect the dots, which is misleading, as I'll get to, it seems like there's a linear trend for horses to get bigger through time. And Cope and other people, especially after him, especially in the early 20th century, linked this idea of what we today would call Cope's Rule to another evolutionary phenomenon called orthogenesis, or straight-line evolution, which is that organismal lineages, or even societies, they often made an analogy there, will change in certain directions until they get too specialized, and then they'll get decrepit and go extinct. They'll collapse. So like the Roman Empire or something like that. Things just, things are going great, and then, you're debauched and things go horrible because you've just kind of boxed yourself in too specialized of a space, being too big, too big to change or something like that. So horses were long in textbooks thought to be an example of that, Cope's Rule. And however, more recently, people have looked at this more carefully through a better fossil record, better techniques, and realized, well, that's way overly simplistic. That horses had a very bushy family tree and evolved into diverse sizes throughout their evolution. It just so happens that the survivors of the horse family tree today or recently are relatively large, or among the largest. There were some other large ones as well. There were some size reductions as well that are kind of swept under the carpet by Coates' rule. So that sort of orthogenesis or Coates' rule doesn't really apply well to horses. Instead, it seems to be more like a drunken walk of size through various sizes, and then ultimately with a big chopping block that gets rid of everything except for the big horse, and almost the big horse too.
There's also this sort of idea of progression and evolution, that somehow things that are around today are this, must be the best because they've been above all longer. So you have that classical sort of starting off with a chimpanzee and the person sort of crawling upright. And it's easy with hindsight to draw that kind of line. If you actually look at the details of what happened. For example, part of the reason why the early horses were smaller is because at that point the whole northern hemisphere was covered by forests, and so animals who live in the forest today tend to be smaller. And then they got larger when the grasslands came in. So some of that change in size was driven not by some sort of evolutionary rule, but by change in climate and habitat. And as John said, it's been quite variable. You've had decreases in size, and you've had increases in size in other lineages.
And also, many lineages tend to start small anyway. You have to start somewhere, and you're probably going to start small if you're going to diversify. So, in a way, the only way to go is up to a certain degree, or to diversify in terms of let's have more small, medium, and large things instead of just small things. You can't get much smaller from small.
I think one thing you were talking about there, making assumptions from the present to a certain extent, and I think there is a problem in my field of people making assumptions from what is here in the present day, and when you start looking at the fossil record, the archaeological, and now we're getting all of the next generation sequencing genetics out of all of this material, we see that the past is a very different place indeed. And there's all sorts of things we didn't know existed. So, for instance, we have no idea that the time horses were determined whatsoever at all. And as we do this ancient genetic work, we're beginning to find lots and lots and lots of lost lineages that aren't actually detectable in the bone record. Przewalski's and modern domesticates you can't actually tell apart easily from the bones, they overlap. Whereas if you do it genetically, you can see these are completely different clades. And as well as seeing that relationship that we didn't see before about that type of horse in the modern day, we're seeing a whole pile of other types that are now completely extinct. And we see domestic types that have disappeared. We see a very large range of wild types that have disappeared. So the horses that are depicted in the Ice Age caves that we were talking about in Lascaux, they're gone. And for a long time people thought they were Przewalski's because the depictions in the caves look like Przewalski's. They've got manes that stand up like a brush. And now we know they're not Przewalski's. We find out that the earliest domestic horses that we thought were the ancestors of our modern ones are Przewalski's. So there's a big revolution happening at the moment, and it's all very, very recent indeed. It's only, the last 5 years that such techniques have been possible.
You've heard that? Sorry.
Well, we're going to take us back again to earlier history, and we think about horse evolution happening in North America, and then horses getting over to the Old World about 2 million years ago. There was a third migration over. We've had a migration over at about 18 million years of things called amphitheaters, that were big browsers. And they were around till about 5 million years ago. And then you had the hipparions, the three-toed cousins of modern horses. And they got to the Old World and were very successful, not only in Eurasia, but also in Africa, about 1 million years ago. And so you had all these different lineages of equids, basically, going over from North America to the Old World and being very successful in the Old World. And modern horses are a recent migration over there, really, compared to the history of horse evolution.
The Coates rule and the problem of drawing lines between 2 points is a good example, though, of science as progress. That, of course, as science goes along, we're going to start with 2 data points and draw a line between them because that's all we have, but then we're going to get a third data point, and it probably isn't going to fit on that line, so we're going to realize, it's not straight linear chain.
New infections are increasing every day.
But I find that reassuring to find that things aren't simple, because nature isn't simple, and so we should, I think, be pleased to see that science is revealing a richer, more diverse portrait of the change of the world through time, especially very complicated changes through very deep time, you should expect surprises.
Hmm.
I think the producer's got a huge surprise for all of you now.
Fine,
I think I'm fine.
In Our Time with Melvyn Bragg is produced by Simon Tillotson.
Hi everyone, Russell Kane here. I've got just a few seconds to tell you about Evil Genius, our hit podcast, 2.5 million downloads in 2019, top 10, where we take people from history, Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, John Lennon, and detonate fact bombs around their reputations. It's stuff you don't want to know, but you really do want to know. At the end of a live debate, my panel of esteemed guests, read banging comedians, all have to vote evil.
Oh,
There's no grey area. This is
to
cancel culture turned into an innovative format. Subscribe to Evil Genius on BBC Sounds now.
Yes, I use this one. Je n'étais alors la fille qui joue pas mal au basketball, qui joue pas mal le rock'n'roll, le rock'n'roll. Je sais pas ce que ça voulait dire, il parlait toujours si fort. It's really a bit dark now. Tiens ton regard aussi fort. Tiens ton regard aussi fort. Tiens ton regard aussi fort. Okay, so that's a bit better. I think it's not too bad, not too. La 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 la. La 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 What? Oh, it's the is it the La 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 la. Okay, I'm going to see if I can must be the updates of that. La 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 la. Ooh. La 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 la. No, I don't want the ringtone. Whoa. La 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 la. Do, 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 do. Right. Let's listen to Matt Hancock's Crap.
Indicators were going down in the right direction. We are getting this virus under control, Matt Hancock said. We're making significant progress, but then he also had a warning. This disease is not done yet. Let's get this assessment from our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young. And Vicky, sort of cautious optimism there from the Health Secretary.
Yeah, and I think the tone there was quite striking, wasn't it? Talking about careful steps, about small changes, about being cautious, about being balanced, and saying to people, do not step too far. So obviously more freedoms for everybody, but actually everyone has a responsibility to make sure that they do continue to follow those guidelines, particularly the guidelines about social distancing. And I thought interesting too, answering more questions about the test and trace system. Now, there's been lots of stories about people who've been recruited to do all of this, but they've been sitting around with not much to do. And I did detect a slight note of irritation, I think, from Matt Hancock there, saying, look, the reason they haven't got so much to do is because we have fewer cases. They are dropping the number of cases, and that's a good thing. So he's pointing out that they're prepared for what might come next, and they don't know what that might be. But if there are to be flare-ups of infection in certain places, they need to have people in place to do that. Also pointing out that contact tracers deal with people, they phone them, they speak to them in order to find out who they've been near. Of course, in lockdown, people haven't been near many other people. So at the moment, yes, they might be sitting around slightly underoccupied. It's a bit like that argument with the Nightingale hospitals. Not many of them were used, and certainly not used to capacity, but the government there pointing out that actually that is a positive thing.
And also his message, Matt Hancock's message, was very much if you have the symptoms, please go out there and get tested. He said 128,000 tests carried out, but actually capacity for testing is way more than that, more than 200,000.
Yeah, and I suppose, again, it's partly that the emphasis at the moment is on easing restrictions, isn't it? We're all talking about the things that we can now do rather than staying at home the whole time. But of course, then that message is a little bit diluted. The message is the same. If you've got those symptoms, then you are expected to isolate. You and those you live with are expected to isolate. You are expected to get a test, and then once you get that test, you then have to make sure that your contacts are traced. Now, you can do that yourself. You can do that on the internet yourself. You don't have to speak to someone necessarily. But I think going back to those basic messages that we all remember from 3 months ago, but have been slightly lost maybe in the last few days, as the emphasis is much more on easing restrictions rather than bringing them in.
And he also said, as I mentioned, the disease is not done yet. I mean, if there are flare-ups in particular areas of the country, the government thinking about kind of little lockdowns.
Yeah, they have made clear that they're willing to do that. And Matt Hancock asked about whether he would be willing to reimpose either national or local restrictions, and says yes, they would be. But of course, looking at some of the pictures over the weekend, people on beaches, people going out, and of course enjoying these new freedoms, then asking people to go back to how it was, of course, would be much harder. But he is making the point there that if it were to happen, if they can detect any kind of flare-up, and of course this is where this testing and tracing system is so important, that they can detect maybe that there's been an outbreak in one particular place, you then could take action, and it could be a lot more precise. It doesn't necessarily have to be a national lockdown. You can do it in local areas, and so it's less disruptive to everybody.
All right, for the moment, Vicky, many thanks indeed once again. Vicky Young there, our chief political correspondent, and our health correspondent, Richard Galpin, is with me here in the studio. And Richard, very much the emphasis from Matt Hancock, please go and get tested if you think you have the symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. He's saying it's absolutely crucial so they can identify the people with the virus. They can then, as you say, they can trace them and then trace the contacts. And we have a number of stats here. I think we have a slide as well. And they're saying that at the moment, or they most recently have done 128,000 tests. That was yesterday. But they have this capacity for more than 200,000 now. So that's why I think they're appealing much more to people to come out and test. They've got the capacity, they can get more tests, and obviously the more tests are done, the better for being able to control the whole pandemic or the epidemic in this country. It's vital.
And this contact tracing system Matt Hancock was asked about by journalists who say that some of this army of contact tracers that's been established, thousands of them, some of them are actually kind of twiddling their thumbs.
Yeah, it does look that way. I mean, actually, Downing Street put out a statement earlier today. They were saying that the test and trace system, they're using the phrase world-beating, but they're saying it's not in its final state operationally. They're saying work is underway to get tests to people and then their contacts are traced, etc. So they are admitting it is a work in progress. And we know, obviously, there have been problems with it, particularly, of course, with the app, which has been trialled on the Isle of Wight. A lot of work still to do with that. But the sort of manual, the people doing the contact tracing, that very clearly is up and running. And it does seem to be proving to be effective. It looks like it. They're saying that the number of tests and contacts traced is high. The system is working well, they're saying.
Yeah, they wouldn't give numbers on that, but they did promise that they would come up with numbers in the near future. But generally, though, in terms of the death figures and the number of new cases and so on and hospital admissions, those numbers are all coming down, and there was very cautious optimism, wasn't there, from Matt Hancock?
Yes, no, I think definitely. He was painting a pretty, or certainly a better picture than we've had. And yes, those numbers, he's saying, are coming down quite significantly. He was saying that the number of deaths is now the lowest since March. The admissions to hospital are down. The number of patients on mechanical ventilators in hospital are also down, and the number of people in hospital with COVID is the lowest since mid-March. So he was highlighting all those stats, which of course seem to be, on the face of it, very positive.
Richard, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Richard Galpin there, our health correspondent. So, as we heard, plenty of discussion in that news conference about the test and trace scheme. It's a key part, of course, of the country's move out of lockdown. But how exactly does it work? And when might you have to use it? Let's just take a look.
Test and trace schemes help tell us where coronavirus is and how it's spreading. This is a race. The sooner infectious people are found, the less the virus spreads. First, test the people who are isolating at home with COVID-19 symptoms. If someone tests positive, then it goes to stage 2, trace. In the UK, contact tracers ask the infected person about their close contacts, people they've recently been less than 2 meters from for more than 15 minutes. Of course, if you get closer to someone, for instance, kiss them or have a face-to-face conversation with them from less than a meter, you'll be contacted no matter how long the time period. If people are following social distancing rules, this shouldn't be a long list. It could include friends, family, housemates, co-workers. These people will also be told to stay at home for 14 days, whether they feel ill or not. They should only get tested if they develop symptoms themselves. That's what happens with people you know, but what about those you don't? Some countries use a contact tracing app to track people's movements and find these strangers to alert those who need to self-isolate. If you're self-isolating in the UK, you're entitled to statutory sick pay, and you should isolate every time you're told to, even if you've had COVID-19 before. So you test and trace people to track down the virus and help countries move out of lockdown.
Well, the First Minister for Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has given an update on the situation there. She said the vast majority of people followed the new measures over the weekend. However, some people did break the rules. On Saturday, there were 797 dispersals by Police Scotland. That's 5 times higher than the figure from the previous Saturday. And on Sunday, road use was up by 70% on the previous Sunday.
It is very hard to see how all of that can have been caused by local residents or by people travelling a reasonable distance to meet loved ones. So we will be considering all of this as we continue, as we must do, to assess the impact of the Phase 1 changes. Last week, we deliberately allowed some flexibility when we changed the lockdown restrictions. We recommended that people don't travel more than 5 miles for recreation, but we left room for some discretion so that you can go further to visit family. We also strongly recommended that when 2 households meet, there should be no more than 8 people in total in a group. But again, we put that into guidance rather than into law, because we do trust and continue to trust the majority to keep those groups small and to stay within the rules. But it is worth being clear. In fact, I have a duty to be clear with you that if there is continued evidence of even a minority not abiding by these guidelines and travelling unnecessarily, if people meet up in larger groups or if they're making journeys which risk spreading the virus, we will have to put these restrictions on group size and travel distance into law. And we won't hesitate to do that if we think that is necessary for the collective safety and well-being of the population.
Nicola Sturgeon, that's the picture in Scotland. Let's just take a look at Northern Ireland now, because some restrictions are being lifted for people who are shielding in Northern Ireland from next Monday. They will be able to go outside with members of their own household or meet one person from another household outdoors. The First Minister Arlene Foster and Deputy First Minister Michelle O'Neill have been speaking at Stormont's daily news conference.
With the level of infection in the community falling, the risk of exposure is significantly less than it has been over this last 2 months. Therefore, in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor, we can advise that from next Monday, the 8th of June, those who are shielding will be able to spend time outside with people from their own household or one person from another household, whilst ensuring social distancing is observed. We believe that this is a reasonable and proportionate first step, and people who are shielding will receive a letter with further advice in the coming days.
Progress towards recovery does not mean that the threat posed by COVID-19 has reduced. Your actions now in combating the spread of the virus are just as important as they have ever been. We urge you to keep sticking to the restrictions that are in place, to keep 2 metres away from anyone who isn't part of your own household, to maintain good hand and respiratory hygiene. Ask yourself this question every time you leave your house: is it really necessary? And if you have to go out, will you be able to follow the advice whilst you're out? We know how challenging these restrictions have been for everyone, and they have been especially difficult and challenging for those who have been advised to shield. So I also am pleased that we're able to come forward with that little bit of good news, that for those people who've been doing so well throughout the most difficult of circumstances.
Michelle O'Neill and Arlene Foster there. Well, open-air markets and car showrooms have reopened in England, but with strict distancing measures in place. For example, if you're taking a car for a test drive, normally you'd have a sales rep in the car with you. Not anymore. From today, you'll be alone. Ministers say the risk of infection is lower outdoors and in more open spaces. Well, in a fortnight, other non-essential shops will again open, but businesses are having to overhaul how they operate to keep customers and staff safe. As Simon Gompers now reports.
This is the Monday with a difference they've been waiting for at Barnsley's open-air market. At last, they can get back to selling what are called non-essentials, like clothes and things for the home, as well as fruit and veg. Customers a bit cautious, but the buying began before 8 o'clock.
I'm quite impressed actually, because first day you just don't know, do you?
And how did that work for you? Was it any different for you?
Well, she stood over there looking at my duvets and asked about a few sizes and prices. She stood over there, I got them out, and then she put the money over there, and then took it from there.
social distancing is vital, keeping everyone 2 metres apart. Hygiene as well, hand sanitisers using foot pumps. The feeling here is of relief.
To have a permanent lockdown for 10 weeks is a nightmare in a small business. You can't measure it as it's. One trader said to me it was like falling off a cliff.
One big issue today as things start going again is the threat of congestion, which is why a lot of markets are reopening stalls gradually in order to guard against the risk that people will start bumping into each other on narrow pavements and walkways. And bearing in mind as well that it's only a couple of weeks until non-essential shops on the high street will also be opening up. Today also sees car dealers back in business after sales of new vehicles fell close to zero during the lockdown. Again, a big emphasis on measures to reduce the risk of transmission, helped by the fact that in most showrooms there's more indoor and outdoor space.
During lockdown, the whole industry effectively shut down. April was very low numbers, May's slightly better, but I think until we see the impact of retail opening, it's going to be very difficult to understand what the true level of demand is.
England is moving fastest on this. In Scotland, smaller shops and outdoor markets can open in the second phase of its easing plan, no date yet. The timing hasn't been fixed yet in Wales either, where non-essential shops and services could open in the amber phase of the exit strategy, nor in Northern Ireland, where non-food outlets will reopen in step 2 of its plan. Here's possibly a sign of what's to come, the queue outside IKEA in Gateshead, which let customers back in today. With the general reopening of non-essential shops in England expected from the 15th, our eerily quiet high streets look set to become much busier. Simon Gompert's BBC News.
Look at the picture overseas now, and many of Italy's cultural icons are reopening as the country continues to ease its lockdown measures. The Colosseum in Rome is welcoming tourists for the first time in months. There are strict limits on the number of people allowed at the site. They're asked to wear masks, and everyone has their temperature taken on entry. Long queues have formed outside shops selling alcohol in South Africa after a controversial ban on its sale was lifted for the first time in 2 months. From Monday to Thursday, alcohol can now be bought for consumption at home. Drink-related violence is a major problem in South Africa. The ban was introduced to relieve pressure on police and hospital casualty departments during the coronavirus lockdown. The country is now easing some lockdown restrictions to help revive its economy, but there is concern that infection rates are beginning to rise. And in Istanbul, the symbolic easing of the coronavirus lockdown there has been taking place. The Grand Bazaar, which dates back to the 15th century, has been reopened after closing for more than 2 months. Many other restrictions are being lifted today in Turkey, allowing travel between cities to resume, and the reopening of cafes, restaurants and sporting facilities. There have been more than 160,000 confirmed cases in Turkey and more than 4,500 deaths. Now, this year's Summer Reading Challenge lineup has been announced, with a host of big names lending their support. The scheme, which reaches out to more than 700,000 children each summer, will be hosted online this year because of the pandemic. The aim of the challenge is to make sure that children continue to read during the longer summer holidays, with this year's event starting a little earlier than usual in order to support parents and carers with children already at home. Well, I've been speaking to one of its ambassadors, the best-selling author and illustrator, Rob Biddulph.
Well, basically the reading agency set the challenge up. They want to encourage primary school age children, really, so sort of 4 to 11, to keep reading during the summer holidays, because traditionally there's a huge blip in reading over that time, obviously, I think. And I just think this year in particular is more important than ever, because school life has been so disruptive, and children's lives in general have been disrupted. They're missing their friends. So I think it's really important that we kind of encourage them to keep on reading and have some kind of focus, to that regard. And apart from anything else, I think it really helps parents and carers find, sort of fun activities to help maintain those literacy levels at this kind of crucial time in their development.
Yeah, because we've been discussing the return to schools today of some pupils to primary schools, but of course they have missed out weeks and weeks of their education, weeks that they're not actually going to get back.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, I've been doing a series of draw-along videos just to kind of help parents have have a little bit of routine into their lives, because homeschooling isn't something that parents have been trained in at all. So that's why I think these kind of initiatives are really, really important. And the fact that we're launching it earlier than usual can only be a help for parents, I think.
Generally, what's your experience of reading amongst young people and children in particular? I mean, I suppose the assumption is that with mobile phones and so on and so much digital technology out there that people are reading less. Is that right, do you think? And if so, how do we get them to read more?
Well, I mean, the statistics show that 1 in 5 children in England still can't read particularly well by the age of 11, so it is still a problem. And I do lots of school visits and festival visits, and one of the first questions that I always ask is, I ask the kids, hands up who has a bedtime story here, and sometimes it's heartbreaking how few hands go up, and then you investigate a little bit further, and it turns out that these people, they don't even have a single book in their home. Maybe it's because of the prevalence of screens and iPads and digital things, but it really is tragic. And the real key in this particular age group is reading for pleasure. That's the thing. If you can get children reading for pleasure, it's been proved that that's more important determination of their educational success than their family's socio-economic status, for example. And those kids that do read for pleasure, they're the ones who are more likely to go on to a more fulfilled life, get managerial or professional jobs later in life. And so it really is key that we sort of get them early, get them really kind of interested in reading, not because they have to, but because they want to. I think it just kind of develops a curious mind which will stand them in great stead for the rest of their lives.
And we can see some of your books behind you there. What is your secret to unlocking a child's imagination?
Oh, well, that's the question. I kind of wish I knew, really. I mean, I think the key as a children's author is you don't talk down to children, and you try to involve them in the story. The books that I write, you can see they're picture books, so they're for the really young ones, from sort of ages 5 to 7. So quite often that experience is a joint experience. So it's reading with mum or dad or your carer on a one-to-one basis. And I think the real key in that situation is that one-to-one time, but there's no screens around. It's just you and mum or dad just reading a book, and the child wants to know what happens over the page, and it just for the sake of the enjoyment of reading and progressing a story, and I think that's really, really important. And there's a certain amount of interactivity as well with my books, because I illustrate my books as well. So you include lots of levels of detail in your stories. So the child might spot something on the 4th or 5th read that they hadn't spotted before in the background of one of the pictures, and that just adds another element to the story. So I think it's important to kind of involve children in storytelling, and that's what I think we as authors and illustrators really strive to do.
Rob Biddulph there. Okay, let's take a look at the weather prospects for you now with Thomas Schaffenacker.
Well, it's been so warm for the last...
Right. Hey, hey, do 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 do. Better knock on wood, baby. Ooh, 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 ooh. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. La la la, la 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 la, da 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 da, la 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 la, la 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 la, do 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 la la. La la, da la 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 la, onward, baby. Ooh, 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 baby. Ooh, 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 ooh. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. La 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 la. La 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 la. Do 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 do. La la. Okay, going to be all right. That looks better, I think. Let's think. La 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 la. Oh, where's the... That's the back one. Okay. Da, da. Right, so I think it's okay. To anal and then that. I need to anal about that. Yeah. Avez-vous planqué dessous à la mode. I'm back. Yes, 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 I'm fucking back. Yes, I'm fucking back. Petit train sans la campagne, ah, et bien, poursuit son chemin. Le bail de ferraille rouille vert de gris, sous la pluie, puis les beaux. Le soleil en flamme au couchant, la taille, chant. Du 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 du. What time is it? Oh, I have to okay, I have to be off. I've got to meditate. Yes, maybe. In a big plan. Oh, my glasses. Be careful with the time. Oh.